This short video will demonstrate the passive and active connection between Sharepoint and Content Manager. This graphic provides an excellent overview of the Sharepoint Content Manager relationship. Essentially, for the two states above the line, Content Manager is aware of the item in Sharepoint by creating a metadata-only record. It does not have the electronic file. For the two states below the line, the item is removed from the Sharepoint site entirely and exists only in Content Manager. In Content Manager, there is still the metadata portion and now the electronic file as well. Now, what we're looking at here is a Sharepoint site for the Human Resources Department, and through the site settings, it has been linked to a particular folder, classification, and retention in Content Manager. That means that any content here already has a place ready for it in Content Manager. Now, it's important to note that the relationship between Sharepoint and Content Manager can be either passive or active. Passive is generally driven by Life Cycle Management Policies, or LMPs. These events are triggered by something happening, say a date being met or an option being set. And an active relationship is generally driven by a user's actions. That is to say, they actively decide to move the item to Content Manager. Taking a closer look at the site, it can be seen that some documents are in various states of management. Using the record number column as a guide, items without a record number live entirely in Sharepoint. Items with a record number are either managed or finalized in Content Manager, but they still exist in Sharepoint. Content Manager is only aware of them and only has a metadata record for them, no electronic file. Looking at the finalized column here, some records have been finalized in Sharepoint and some have not. Marking an item as finalized is one of the triggers for passive registration. This item is a little different from the rest because it has a record number, but it has not been finalized in Sharepoint. That implies it was manually sent to Content Manager. My first demonstration will showcase the passive ingestion that is triggered by an event, or in this case, setting a record as finalized in Sharepoint. I'm going to pick this Career Development Plan record, and I'm going to mark it as finalized. I'll click it to select it, then select the properties. I want to mark it as finalized as this will trigger the event. I'll make the change and then click Save to apply that change. I'm returned to Sharepoint site and you can see that the finalized flag has been set to yes. Now, we'll have to wait a bit for anything to happen because this is a lifecycle management policy event. While we're waiting, let me demonstrate an active relationship as I will actively send something to Content Manager. I'll look for a record that is not finalized and does not have a record number. Let me choose this one, this HR Relations document. First, I will select it and then click on the Files tab up here to display the menu bar. Now there are a lot of commands and I want the Content Manager button. Clicking on it, there are a number of different options to choose from. The first four relate to the graphic displayed earlier, and the last two relate to the connection to Content Manager. They wouldn't necessarily be seen by an average user. For this example, I will click on Manage with Content Manager. The next screen that pops up tells me that the item is not currently managed, and then identifies where in Content Manager it will go if I choose to manage it. I'll click OK, which is off screen, to connect the item to Content Manager. The next screen advises that the action has been placed in a queue and will be completed as quickly as possible. Finally, I'm brought back to the Sharepoint site. At this point, I want to point out that the passive record we adjusted its finalized state has now been assigned a record number. Remember, the file, the electronic portion, is still in Sharepoint, but Content Manager is aware of its existence and has created a metadata record. Okay, so I'm waiting on this HR Relations document to get a record number, so I'll demonstrate one more action: Archive to Content Manager. I'll click it to select it, and then from the toolbar, click on Content Manager and select Archive. Remember, this will remove the electronic item from SharePoint, and it will only exist in Content Manager. It will no longer be visible at this site. I get the same two pop-up screens, and I'm returned to SharePoint. Looking at everything, the HR document now has its record number here. And while it's hard to tell, the items I just archived to Content Manager are no longer visible on this site. The item now lives only in Content Manager. What would be possible is a web part with a preset save to display items from Content Manager that came from this site. For the final part of this demo, let me jump over to Content Manager web client and do a search for items registered today. The results are returned, and here are the 3 records from SharePoint. Notice that this one has an application icon and the other 2 do not. That represents the fact that this item exists in Content Manager and these 2 are simply being managed in Content Manager. There is no electronic portion, just metadata. This rogue 4th file is just the nightly audit. And this concludes a simple demonstration of the SharePoint Content Manager integration and its various options.